that the meeting has been recorded and will be live streamed, and I'm sure thousands will be waiting for it to come on. The safe and health requirement of the councils should be on the screen here. It is, thank you. Text for any amendments should be emailed through. Yep. Please ask members or presenters to give their name before speaking and using the microphone. All right. Rolly, could I ask you to do our karakia for opening, please?
Ka tēnā koe te rangatira. Whānau me karakia tātou. Tūtawa mai runga, tūtawa mai raro. Tūtawa mai to, tūtawa mai waho. Tau wai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie, tāekie. Kia ora.
Thank you. We have apologies from Daniel Harris, and of course the Mayor's busy over in America touring around, so he won't be here today.
Oh, there we go, there's more.
And Chris. Okay, anyone else? All right, can I have a move in a second? Apologies. Thank you. Can I have a vote? Thank you. Vote on it. Okay. Notification of additional items. There's none today.
Just read out the result.
Oh, sorry. Can you? How many were there?
Oh, did you vote? Just write out. Just say unanimous.
Unanimously, everyone voted. Thank you. We have no additional items by the looks of it. What about declaration of interest, if any? None? Thank you. Public comments? Okay. We have the confirmation of minutes.
I'm happy to move them.
Thank you. Thank you. Put it to the vote. Unanimous?
Do you want to vote again? Yeah. Yeah, we vote again.
Okay.
It'll come on again. Just
Okay.
push the green button. You have to push the green or, yeah, the coloured buttons. Okay. That's it. Yes, pass unanimously.
Pass unanimously again. Thank you.
Invite Kathy to come and take a seat.
All right, we'd like to ask Kathy if she would mind coming and taking the seat, please. I did say please.
And presenting Te Motuopautoa update.
And she will be doing the presenting Te Motuopautoa development. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the committee. So this report covers a number of matters, and perhaps if I just take you through them one by one. So the project steering group has met for the first time, and as part of that process, they considered the draft terms of reference for the steering group that had been confirmed by council. And as they wished no further changes to those terms of reference, it's now appropriate for council to confirm them as the terms of reference for the steering group going forward. When the steering group met, they considered a number of matters in a report that was presented by the program director, including where the project was at. So currently the project is in full flight. We are progressing with our resource consenting matters through a team working on that. We have got a team who are working on the design of the Cliff Road upgrade, a separate team. We've got another team that is working on the building project. Now that's the biggest part of this, the development of the facility. An architect, the Boone, have been appointed to manage that facility side of things, and they've got a number of people working for them on matters such as geotech and the other things associated with that. So that project is well under way as well. So we had a meeting the other day to bring all the relative parties together that are working on the various components of this project, and there would have been 20 people in the room. Given the nature and the complexity of this, and that is being managed overall by Steve Bramley as the Program Director, and it was Steve that presented his report. So we've attached to this report to the committee at this stage the minutes from that steering group, and so you'll see the things that were discussed and some of the resolutions that were made. One of the things that was considered was the overall fundraising for the project, and it was confirmed that at this stage that the QS believes that the project can still be completed within the $15 million envelope. However, there are establishment costs associated with what will go on inside the facility that need to be brought into the program as well. So the recommendation to the steering group was to consider the fundraising effort as not the 15, but to aim at a larger target that hopefully would be able to cover some of those establishment costs. So the steering group has made a resolution to be looking at a $16 million fundraising envelope, and potentially that raising up to $16.5 million if the project were to be delayed another year, which obviously would add to the costs. One of the things that the steering group considered and all members spoke on was whether it was appropriate for this particular project to go to gambling trusts, in effect, for fundraising, and the group determined that they didn't think that that was consistent with the project. Probably the largest matter that came out, and which most of my report covers, is the need to determine what the ongoing governance and management arrangements will be, even if it's only at the intention at this stage, in order to complete fundraising applications. So all of the fundraising bodies with due diligence are not just considering the cost of the capital build, but how will this project that we are seeking funding for be governed and managed in the future so that it's a sustainable project. So it's appropriate for council to give consideration to that funding mechanism. Obviously, in terms of the Kawanata, we're in partnership with Rangitāne on this project and on the ongoing management. And so consideration was given to a report that has a draft report that has been presented by the project director that gives consideration how that might happen. And it was considered that a CCO is an appropriate mechanism for a number of reasons, but one of them being that that is a mechanism in which Rangitāne and council and other partners, if necessary, can govern together, and you can look at the shareholding of that relative to the funding that has been provided to that project. So it makes sense. From a local government point of view, however, council needs to make a resolution to form a CCO, and council can only do that once it has gone through a public consultation process. And council can only go through a public consultation process once it is determined that a CCO is the preferred option, having given consideration to all other practical options and those who might be affected by the options, their input onto that before making a decision. So that's all outlined in the report. So we've got two things in play here. One, we have a relatively urgent decision to make a decision about a structure going forward. And the second part is getting in train a process that is a somewhat extended process that will allow us to do that. And that's really something that this committee needs a council direction on. And so the third recommendation covers that point.
Do we have any burning questions?
Tēnā koe te rangatira. Thanks, Kathy. I've already asked this question in a previous meeting, but I'm understanding that there are some practical design works going on at the moment. We've engaged in architecture and all that sort of stuff. How are we paying for all of those costs?
All of those costs were included within the current LTP provisions of this current year. And those costs will be capitalised as part of the overall project. We have put a hold point in place. So in order to apply for building consent and resource consent, we need the design. But obviously we would not proceed to construction until all of the external fundraising had been raised. So it could be that the work that we do on the design and the building consent and the resource consent has to sit for a while until we've got the construction costs, but that work that we're doing wouldn't be wasted money.
Right, okay, because that was my next question. If for some reason the funding is unable to be raised, then any consents that have been issued or put out could still remain there, providing they are acted on within a certain period of time?
That's correct, providing they're acted on within a certain period of time, and providing that council hadn't made a decision in the interim period for any change that would impact on those designs. We may have to go back and make an amendment to a consent if that was the case.
For sure. Last question, Cassie, if you can speak to this, but in terms of Rangitāne's contribution of $2 million, prior to today, has that conversation landed where that money is actually coming from? Is it coming from Rangitāne Iwi Settlement Trust or another entity attached to the iwi, or is there an access to some government funding that iwi are able to reach into that council may not be?
The intention is from the trustees that it will be coming from the Settlement Trust.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regards to setting up a CCO, and when we had the steering group meeting, it was outlined that having a CCO would actually mean that the financial cost or associated with this would actually come off council's books and created into the CCO. Can you just confirm that and outline the advantages of that for council?
Yes, certainly the capital funding and the debt wouldn't be recognised as a council debt. It would sit outside of that and sit with the CCO, and that is one of the advantages of this options. I'm not sure whether the Chief Financial Officer wants to speak to that further.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Not really a lot more to add at this point. I think we would have to go through the process of actually establishing the CCO and just working out exactly what cost sits where, how our lenders and funders would actually view what is the most appropriate place for some of this to sit. So that's detail really that once you start getting in the establishment phase of a CCO that would work out at that time and bring something more meaningful back then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few questions. Firstly, matters arising from the PSG meeting outlined on page 13, bullet point 4.1, talks about the main agenda items were the Program Director's report. Now, I'm just wondering where we would find that report.
You wouldn't find that report. That report went to the steering group.
Is that report available to elected members or available to this committee?
I guess that would be a decision for the chair of the steering group. Because the report was not prepared for a public audience, it was prepared for the steering group. So consideration would have to be given to how that might be released. That would be, my understanding, that would be the decision of the chair.
So is there confidential information in that report that would preclude it from being shared, or?
Potentially, we'd need to put that through our governance team, but there is reference there to material that relates to the contractors. I don't think that the substantial things that you may be interested in would be confidential.
Okay, thank you. Now, just moving down to 4.6, where it talks about the overall project budget now being treated as 16 million rather than the 15 million, and rising to 16.5 if the project's delayed. I'm just wondering how those changes impact on the LTP, our LTP budgets. Are our current provision, would that enable that level of budget? I'm just trying to understand the shift from 15 to 16 or 16.5 that we've provided for that through our LTP.
Not quite is my answer to that. In that the current LTP provisions don't perfectly line up with our funding envelopes. One of the things that you'll see when the draft 25-26 budget comes through is that we're looking to move some of the money around. There are two provisions within the current LTP. One is for the capital build and the associated operating costs of that build, and the second is for is an establishment program. The two of those together I don't think quite line up to the 16.2, but they're very close to it. And that's because we're still working through some of the figures.
That's because what, sorry?
So we'll still be working through some of the figures. So
Okay.
we've you'll see later in my report that the program steering group have asked for a deep dive at their next meeting. Once that deep dive has been done, I think then we can have a look and say, are all of those costs, the legitimate costs, the best way to deal with those costs, where those costs lie. We should have completed that project before the council considers the draft budget process.
Okay, as in on the 7th of November.
Yeah, so so you'll get our on the 7th of November, the report contains where we think those costs are going to lie for the 25-26 year. No doubt there'll be questions as we go further through the budgeting process about, well, what about the years further out?
So do you mean the 24-25 year?
Yeah, so no, for the 25-26 year. So coming up, you'll consider a draft budget for the 25-26 year. This current year, we have adequate funding. The construction of this project is not due to start, if we're on timeline, until December 25. So that affects the next budget of council, not the current budget of council.
Okay, thank you. And there was a council decision during the LTP process where council agreed not to proceed with can't remember the exact wording. I think Councillor Bowen might have moved it, but it was to do with not proceeding with projects until the external funding was confirmed. And I'm just wondering, in terms of implementing that direction, is that what is officers' understanding of that direction in terms of, does that apply to all operating investment, or is that just the capital of investment, or where does that, what's the understanding of the implementation of that direction?
So when this program was put up in the LTP, that direction was reflected in the description for the program that said that construction would not commence until all external fundraising had been raised. So the way we've set up the program is deliberately so that we could do the design. We separate into two programs deliberately, so we could do the design and consenting piece, and the construction program would not start to, the money sitting in that would not start to be uplifted until the external fundraising had been raised.
Okay, so it's just the construction, it's not the consenting process or the designs or any of that?
That's correct.
Okay.
A number of our projects, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. Until you've got the design and the stuff that we're doing now, you can't raise the external funds for the construction. Okay. So it's necessary upfront investment that council must make.
So the upfront funding that's being spent at the moment that you've mentioned is in this year's budget, is that operational expenditure, or is it capital expenditure? And what level of risk are we taking in terms of if worst case scenario, if the project doesn't progress within, I'm not sure what the certain period of time is, when does that funding become a risk that it has to be operationalised instead of capitalised?
So the risk is covered in the risk register that was considered, and that risk will change over time as we get closer to the target. The risk associated with this project would be higher if council and Rangitāne had not already made the level of commitment they've made for funding for this project. We're seeking 3 to 4 million of a $16 million project from the external market. And so that's where the risk really sits. In terms of what is the risk of when we would have to operationalise it, that would be a decision of council in partnership with Rangitāne, because if you don't meet your fundraising target, then a report would be coming back and saying, well, we haven't met our fundraising target, what do we do next?
Okay, so what is that certain period of time that's been mentioned?
Council has not given, or Rangitāne have not given us any direction on what that certain amount of time would be.
Oh, so is it not a financial, are there no rules around the finance side of this? Because previously where there've been projects, we've been told that if it's not raised within a certain amount of time, then it has to be operationalised, the cost has to be operationalised.
That parameter has not been put on officers, or council has not made a decision on that. Things can sit as works in progress for a relatively long period of time. There'll be a finance decision at some stage to say, is that something we're still pursuing? Is that still a reasonable risk, or is it something we're abandoning and therefore writing off? And that would be a finance decision that would come back to council.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a few more questions arising from the minutes on page 20. Just trying to understand the PSG unanimously agreed, it's partway down that page, it's talking about a 4.5 million external funding. You talked about a $3 to $4 million external funding, and I think Councillor Fitzgerald talked about 2 million of that. I'm just wanting to be clear what the external funding envelope is exactly. Is it 4.5 or is it 3 to 4?
Certainly, I can cover that off, and I'm sorry that is confusing. 3 million would be the amount that would allow us to do the construction. 4 million would be the amount that would allow us to cover our establishment costs. That would rise to 4.5 million if the project was delayed until the later date of construction in 26 because of other delays in external fundraising.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense. And just trying to understand if it's a $16.5 million program now with perhaps 4.5 external. I had thought that council's contribution was 10 million, but that leaves a shortfall of 12 million.
Yes, council's contribution is 10 million. Rangitāne's contribution is 2 million. The balance would be made up by external funding.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank you, that's all from me.
Councillor Zabella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Kathy. On that same line of questioning, what are the pre-opening, or what's the nature of the pre-opening costs or the establishment costs? What sort of things are being picked up in that budget line?
Certainly. So, in order for a cultural facility to be up and running, we've got costs associated with the marketing, the getting the manager on site and the staff on site, getting them up to speed with what they would need to do in their roles, the setting up of the facility ready for those first days are the typical establishment costs that we wouldn't consider as part of the building, but more about what's going on in the building. So if you consider it in that light, it's about what happens in the facility, and there's a reasonable lead-in time. This is a very specialised facility, and it needs specialised and skilled staff.
Excellent. So we're looking to try and use the external funding for that to reduce the operational expenditure for council. That's the rationale?
In the absence of somebody else paying for this, it would be paid for from somewhere. And to be successful, Neil Anderson, our advisor, has told us that we really need to be up and running on this stuff ahead of opening, so there's no opportunity to offset it with revenue at the beginning. And so no decision has been made as to who would cover those costs, and that would all be part of how we look at the governance and management going forward. And certainly the steering group are looking at, is that a council cost, is that a Rangitāne and council cost, is it an external cost? And the decision was, well, let's try and get some external funders to help with that cost at this stage.
Thank you. And then my understanding is that the cost of establishing a CCO is around 70k additional to that, with potentially a 50k operating budget for the CCO component. Have I read that correctly?
That amount has been included in the establishment costs.
I thought I read that differently in the minutes, that it would be additional. Steve tabled a slide with a summary of establishment costs in addition to, has that been wrapped up subsequently as part of the meeting? Great, thank you, that's really helpful. And my only other question was about, in the report it noted that the program director presented a proposed funding profile for $16.5 million. And I was just curious as to the journey that we go on and from 4.2 through to 4.7, where it says we agree that the budget for construction is 15 million, but by the time we've got to 4.7, the program director has presented a $16.5 million funding profile. So I'm just curious as to how that funding profile was presented. Did he also present a picture of what a $15 million total budget would look like as a comparison?
No. So the funding profile that was presented by Steve was, these are the funders that we are looking to approach. This is the order in which we're looking to approach them, and this is the amount we're seeking from each of them. And that collectively made up to 16.5. Now, that's on the assumption that we are successful in each of those applications and for the amounts that we're putting forward. So that's what the funding profile consisted of.
Okay, great, that's really helpful. Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. I guess for completeness, and I have raised this with colleagues around the roading, that NZTA have not made any contribution for design and construction to the Cliff Road, and that's of the vicinity of 3.65 million. That will come to our November meeting next week, or at least our workshop. Can you have some further comment around that, as far as the context of us having to make those decisions still to allow for that investment?
Yes, certainly. To the November meeting, because the November meeting is looking at the transport whole in the current year, and that's what that report will focus on, which is the design part. And we were assuming we'd get more money for design, and the transport manager has put together a proposal around that. In terms of the construction, that is in the LTP for an out year, and that will come to you in your discussions on the draft budget, because we are looking there to not only fund something that is vital to the project, but also bring it forward in terms of where it had been placed in the LTP. The upgrade to Cliff Road was considered as part of this project. It's absolutely important for this project, but it's also safety improvements to Cliff Road. The transport manager will advise on what the opportunity is of getting funding in the future for that, but it needs to be funded somehow. And at the moment, we have to assume that we need to secure funding for it, and how that's going to be done and whether council underwrites it or not. But I'll leave the content of that for the transport manager to cover off with you.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Sorry, there was one further question I had that I forgot earlier. Just the second page of the minutes included under general business that the PSG agreed that the slides which support the financial modelling should be circulated to the PSG members. And I'm just wondering if those slides can also be shared with elected members.
Council has made a decision to establish a project steering group with the intention that there's a representative model that is looking at this project on your behalf. In that context, the slides, the PSG had asked to go through at their next meeting those slides in detail, which is why they've been presented back to the PSG. Again, the decision on whether the PSG want that circulated wider in this model, which is a representative model, would be a decision for the chair of the project steering group, not for myself.
Would it be a decision for the chair, or would it be a decision for council if council requested that information?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Okay, so is there
Sorry,
any?
through the chair, councillor, we'll take that on notice and then come back to you on that.
Thank you. That would be much appreciated.
I move that be accepted. And second. Thank you. Any comments? Councillor? Kathy, thank you so much. Can we go put that to the, oh, do we read this out?
Yes, and just say, you've moved, I've seconded, and now any comments?
Both myself and Debbie have moved and seconded. Is there any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to thank the officers and the steering group for the progress that's been made and this report, and for the officer in answering the questions. It was really helpful for me in unpicking that. I just wanted to note that I am in support of these recommendations, and would also like to propose an amendment to number 3, if I had a seconder for it, to that council note, to that council support, or that council endorse the steering group's position about seeking or not seeking funding from gaming trusts. I think it's a good opportunity to put our support in behind the direction that the steering group wants to take, and I just thought note isn't quite the strength of language that I would like to see, so I'll write it up and put it in if anyone is interested in seconding that. Kia ora, thank you.
Councillor Dennis?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support all the recommendations. I think the other suggested amendment or alteration is, I'd also endorse that. It was become clear through the steering group's session that the CCO model was most befitting actually for moving this project ahead and having a governance structure and a funding mechanism to actually allow an ongoing coverage both in those two aspects. And so I thought that was very sound, so that supports number 2. And if the council was to endorse the not applying for gaming, we just thought that applying for gaming fund for a project of this nature just was out of character, didn't sit well, and so that was a unanimous position on the governance board there. Thank you.
Councillor?
Thank you. It's really good to get this update and be kept in the loop of the the big picture of where this program, how this program is progressing. It does concern me a little bit that the funding envelopes that are described in this report don't line up with our current LTP provision. I understand that those things can be changed, but I think LTP provision should be the assumptions that guide the overall funding envelope, as a basis. So I would be concerned if that overall funding that's been assumed by the steering group, I'd be concerned if that's being assumed before the proper process of any changes through council. I'm comfortable with the steering group terms of reference, and in particular the part that talks about accountability, that the program sponsor will report back to each committee, each meeting of the Rangitāne or Manawatū committee on matters raised during PSG meetings and any actions arising. I probably hadn't anticipated that there would be a lack of transparency around some of the information that has been made available to the steering group, but doesn't appear at this stage to be shared with this committee or with elected members. So I'll look forward to hearing back from the Chief Executive on that matter to see if that can be resolved. But certainly look forward to further information about the CCO model and what the pros and cons of that are. It's obviously quite a lot of water under the bridge that needs to happen before construction can take place in terms of the established, decisions around the governance model, weighing up different things around CCO model and other models, as well as the raising of the funding. So I wish those involved all the best. But I do think from experience with steering groups, we have been burnt before where the steering groups run away with other budgets that don't align with LTP. So this is a point of concern if I'm seeing that already so early in the process. I guess I think it's only the first meeting of the steering group, and already that's seems to be assumed as a bigger budget than what has been approved by council. So I'd like to see that process happen in the correct order, where if there is to be any change of budgets, that happens through an endorsement from or decision from council first, rather than the steering group making that assumption.
No further comments? All right, let's vote on it. Sorry?
Can we take number 3 separately?
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
So we'll do 1 and 2 first.
So let's do 1 and 2 first. The council agree the terms of reference with the Manawatū Steering Group, attachment 1. 2, the council investigate the use of a council-controlled organisation, CCO, or other subsidiary identical models as part of the startup structure for the Manawatū and the Cultural Centre. So that's moved by me and seconded by Debs. Thank you. So let's vote on that. Oh, 100%. There are, good result. Passed, everyone's happy with it. Kia ora. The third one. The council endorsed the Manawatū program steering group's position that they do not wish to seek funding from gambling trusts for this project. Moved by me and seconded by Deb. Thank you. Is there any comments on that? Kia ora, ready to vote when you are. I see vote 5 for and 2 against. Vote is carried. Now, could I ask that Te Whetiko Todd Taipa come to the seat, please?
Rangitāne te mana whenua, e mihi ana ki a koutou. Pupuri nei ki te mauri o te whenua. Me te wai, tuarua ki a koe Kaikauni Hera Fitzgerald nau rā nā kupu Karakia, te tukuna o ki te wahi naro, kia manaaki hia nei, kia tātou I tēnei wā, nei roki, nei te nui mihi kia koe, tēnei wā. E te tia, kia koe te pāpā wiremu, nau rā I whakahaere hia I tō tātou hui. Rere tonu nā mihi kia koe. Kia koe hoki te kai kaunihera tuarua, kaika tuarua, kia koe, nā mihi nui kia koe whaia, a koutou katoa. Nā kai hāpai I te kāwenata o tō tātou nei, me tō tātou nei iwi tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora tātou. Just representing the Te Whiri Kōkō forum, engagement forum. Since our last hui, there's only been one meeting to report on. I'm going to leave it largely as read. Would just highlight the significance, growing significance of the work in terms of reserves. The work with Rangitāne on the Ashes Domain Reserve Management Development Plan is not only significant in its own right, but also is helping us to develop a language and a template and a way of framing reserves, which I think officers are very confident can become a lens that we can apply for future reserve management planning. And I think that the depth of work, especially in terms of the operational settings for our reserves, and the generous proposals from Rangitāne to work alongside our operational staff. I think officers have really appreciated that openness, and I think it gives a really good opportunity for this generation of council to kind of not only have I suppose secure some formalisation in terms of structure, but also systems that flow through to how, for example, wāhi tapu, wāhi tupuna, ancestral sites are cared for, and if there are roles that our staff have, that role can be clear and understood. And at the other end of the spectrum, there will be sites where it's more likely the model will look like Rangitāne in their kaitiaki role, leading those, the care and management of those spaces. So there's still plenty of work to be done, but I just want to acknowledge in particular the staff and the Parks and Reserves team for their sort of tremendous work in this space, and hopefully in the coming months the elected members will see the fruits of this work, and it will give you confidence in terms of the legacy that you get to make decisions on and leave for future generations. So I'll just leave my opening comments there. Kia ora tātou.
Any questions of Todd? I take it that's a big no. I move, and Debbie's going to second it. We move the memorandum. Any comments on that?
Me, thank you.
Yes, Your Worship.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, through you. Tēnā koe, Todd. Like to acknowledge your new title of Pautoko Apore Manager Māori Advisory. The CE had shared that with me, and ngā mihi ki a koe mo tō mahi a tāua. I just want to sort of really acknowledge the good work that this report, and say thank you very much. I notice every time you come it's quite a considerable amount of comment about the projects or the work undertaken by Te Whiri Kōkō. So a big mihi to Te Whiri Kōkō, and in particular I want to acknowledge you and Leon and all other staff who are involved for your tremendous support and good work. And I don't have much to add to this because I think it's pretty evident about things going on, but Yeah, just he mihi nui ki a koe o tira ki tō rōpū tautoko ngā kaimahi. So thank you. Tēnā koe.
Can we go to the vote, please? Oh, sorry, Aroha Mai Dennison. Councillor Dennison.
Kia ora, Chair. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that have come through our council table, and this is appropriate in this joint committee, Rangitāne on Manawatū committee, to make issues reflected around the local water done well, which is one of the very first points about how rushed this process is, and so unfortunate is that we can't engage our communities together on this, and even our working together on a shared viewpoint on moving forward seems like the opportunity is very limited. And that council have taken a position, with a preferred position in our December report, that if there's nothing satisfactory with working in a wider CCO forum, that the city would be prepared to go alone so we can have those opportunities to iron out, and rather than get unfortunate consequence of not having a strong relationship with Rangitāne, let alone our wider community together. So I want to make that point. The other one was around the Waka Kotahi funding, and not so much the funding, but the proposal for a toll across the new highway, and that wanted to acknowledge your position at the Ashes community meeting representing Rangitāne about being fully opposed from a Rangitane's viewpoint, and that too would be the city's view. And that again, I think that brings real strength to our community that we're advocating on their behalf for no toll on the replacement road. And then lastly, I just wanted to say that the city this morning actually made a commitment to support Rangitāne with the hosting of the hikoi that's coming through the country, and that was a strong vote to support a level that was appropriate to support our ongoing relationship and feeling that's important, and where we can work together in that space. We're glad that you asked, and obviously we want to say that in some ways you shouldn't have to, and that would be there supporting that cause. Thank you, Chair.
Love that good news. Right. I'll move it in a second. Yes. Thank you. Now we'll just go to the vote. Passed unanimously. Good number, that 7. Kia ora. This should be interesting. We'd like Wade Crockett to come and give us a comment on number 9 there, committee work schedule.
Through the chair, happy to take that as read. No further comment to be made.
Thank you. Do I need to move in a second, mate? Move. Okay. I'll second it. Can we put that to the vote, please? Look at that, eh? Passed unanimously again. It's been such a pleasure to be here today. I must run back to my next meeting, but may I say, it's been a pleasure. Mr. Fitzgerald, Councillor, would you like to close with a karakia? Thank you.
Ka nui ngami hati ki a koe te pāpā, Wiremu. Koutou katoa, ko tau mai nei anō no reira me kariki a tātou. Ka puta ki te whaiau, ki te ao marama, whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. Kia ora.
And may I add, the All Blacks have a good game. Kia ora.